The union representative stepped onto the Unforgiven set with the confidence of a man who'd never met anyone he couldn't intimidate. What he encountered in Clint Eastwood would teach him that some boundaries exist for reasons more fundamental than labor contracts or industry politics. It was August 1991 in the Alberta Badlands, and the production of Unforgiven was proceeding exactly as Clint preferred. Quiet efficiency, professional focus, and respect for both the work and the people doing it. The cast and crew had settled into the rhythm that made Clint's sets legendary in Hollywood. No drama, no ego conflicts, just skilled professionals creating something meaningful together. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like it. Then Frank Torrino arrived from Los Angeles with a briefcase full of grievances and 23 years of union politics behind him. Torrino was a senior representative from the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, a man who'd built his reputation on never backing down for management, no matter how powerful or famous they might be. He'd faced down studio heads, confronted legendary directors, and intimidated producers into compliance with union regulations. To Torrino, Clint Eastwood was just another management figure who needed to be reminded where the real power lay. The complaint that brought Torrino to Alberta involved overtime regulations and meal break schedules. According to reports filed by someone on the crew, the production was requiring longer work days than union contract allowed and was scheduling meal breaks in ways that technically violated labor agreements. The violations were minor, the kind of scheduling flexibility that experienced crews often accepted willingly when working with directors they respected. But Torrino wasn't interested in context or willing cooperation. He was interested in establishing authority and making sure everyone understood that union rules applied to everyone, including Clint Eastwood. Torrino's first mistake was arriving unannounced and demanding to see Clint immediately, interrupting a complex scene that required precise timing and coordination between multiple actors. His second mistake was his tone when addressing the assistant director, who politely asked him to wait until the scene was completed. His third mistake was assuming that Clint Eastwood would respond to intimidation the same way other industry figures had. When Clint finished the scene and approached Torrino, the union representative was ready with his prepared presentation. He'd done this hundreds of times before. Establish dominance early, make it clear that compliance wasn't optional, and ensure that management understood they were dealing with someone who had real power behind him. Torrino's opening words were designed to put Clint on the defensive immediately. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm Frank Torrino, ITC Local 44. We have multiple violations of union agreements on this production, and they need to be addressed immediately. You're in breach of overtime regulations, meal break requirements, and crew scheduling protocols. These aren't suggestions. They're contractual obligations that you're legally bound to follow." Clint listened without interrupting, his face showing the same neutral expression he'd perfected over 4 decades of dealing with difficult people. When Torrino finished his opening statement, Clint asked a simple question: "What specific violations?" Torrino pulled out his briefcase and began reading from a prepared list. August 15th, crew worked 11 hours without proper meal break scheduling. August 18th, overtime calculations didn't follow standard union formulas. August 22nd, weekend work assignments violated rotation protocols. August 25th, equipment handling procedures ignored union safety guidelines. He continued for several minutes, detailing minor scheduling issues and procedural variations that occurred naturally on remote location shoots. Throughout Torrino's recitation, Clint remained silent, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification on specific points. He didn't argue with any of the accusations or offer explanations for the scheduling decisions. His calm attention seemed to encourage Torrino, who interpreted Clint's silence as submission to union authority. "These violations need to stop immediately," Torrino continued, his voice growing more aggressive as he sensed what he believed was victory. "Production schedules need to be restructured to ensure full compliance. Overtime policies need to be implemented exactly as written in union contracts. Meal breaks need to be scheduled according to standard protocols, regardless of creative requirements. And all future scheduling decisions need to be approved by union representatives before implementation." When Torrino finished his demands, Clint asked another simple question: Are the crew members who filed these complaints willing to speak with me directly? Torrino shifted uncomfortably. That's not how this works. Union representatives handle all labor disputes. Crew members don't negotiate individually with management. You deal with me, and I deal with them. That's how union protection works. I understand, Clint said quietly, but I'd still like to hear from them directly about their concerns. That's not going to happen, Torrino replied, his tone becoming harder. You don't get to intimidate workers by confronting them individually. They filed legitimate complaints through proper channels, and those complaints will be addressed through proper channels. Which means you deal with me. Clint nodded slowly. And if I disagree with your interpretation of the violations? Torrino smiled, the expression of someone who'd heard this question many times before and knew exactly how to answer. Then you'll discover that union solidarity is stronger than movie star ego. This production can be shut down with one phone call. Your cast and crew will walk off this set, and they won't come back until every violation is resolved to union satisfaction. You think you're powerful because you're famous, but I represent thousands of workers who can stop your movie permanently. The threat hung in the air between them, and Torrino waited for Clint's response. He delivered variations of this ultimatum dozens of times to producers and directors who thought their status in Hollywood made them immune to union pressure. Most of them folded quickly once they understood the financial consequences of a work stoppage. A few tried to negotiate or find compromise solutions. None of them had ever simply walked away. But that's exactly what Clint did. He looked at Torrino for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the cameras without saying another word. Torrino stood there holding his briefcase, uncertain how to interpret what had just happened. Was Clint considering his demands? Planning to return with a counterproposal? Consulting with his producers about how to respond? 20 minutes later, Torrino had his answer. Clint's first assistant director approached him with a calm, professional demeanor. Mr. Torrino, Mr. Eastwood would like you to leave the set now. Excuse me. Torrino couldn't hide his surprise. We haven't resolved anything. The violations still exist. The complaints are still valid. You can't just ignore union concerns. You're not being ignored, the assistant director replied. You're being asked to leave. Security will escort you to your car. Torrino's confident demeanor cracked for the first time since arriving in Alberta. This isn't how labor disputes work. You can't just kick out union representatives. I have legal authority to investigate violations and ensure compliance. You're making this situation much worse for yourselves. Two security guards appeared beside the assistant director, their presence making it clear that Torrino's departure wasn't a negotiation. But Torrino wasn't finished making his point. As he was walked toward the parking area, he called back loud enough for the crew to hear him. This production is in violation of union agreements. Any crew member who continues working under these conditions is undermining union solidarity. You have rights, and those rights are being violated by management who think they're above the rules. The crew members within earshot looked uncomfortable, not because they felt their rights were being violated, but because Torrino's confrontational approach was disrupting the professional atmosphere they'd been enjoying. Most of them had worked on multiple films with Clint and understood that his sets operated differently from typical Hollywood productions. The scheduling flexibility that Torrino was complaining about usually benefited crew members more than management. When Torrino reached his rental car, he made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Mr. Eastwood, you're making a serious mistake. This won't end here. I'll be filing formal complaints with union leadership, and they'll take action that goes far beyond what I was proposing. You had a chance to resolve this quietly, and you chose confrontation instead. Clint walked over to where Torrino was standing beside his car. For a moment, it seemed like he might be reconsidering, perhaps ready to negotiate or find some compromise that would satisfy union requirements without disrupting the production schedule. Instead, Clint spoke 5 words that would end Torrino's involvement with the film permanently. Don't come back to my set. The words were delivered in Clint's characteristic quiet tone, but their finality was unmistakable. Torrino started to respond, perhaps planning to explain that union representatives couldn't be banned from investigating violations, that legal processes existed for resolving labor disputes, that Clint's authority as director didn't extend to ignoring union contracts. But something in Clint's expression stopped him from speaking. This wasn't the intimidated management figure he'd expected to encounter. This wasn't someone who could be pressured into compliance through threats of work stoppages or union solidarity. This was someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be argued out of it. Torrino got in his car and drove away, leaving behind a set that returned to its normal rhythm within minutes. The crew members who'd allegedly filed complaints never came forward to support Torrino's position. The minor scheduling issues he complained about were resolved through informal discussions between Clint and the crew, the kind of collaborative problem-solving that made his productions run smoothly. When Torrino returned to Los Angeles, he discovered that his confrontational approach had backfired completely. Union leadership wasn't interested in escalating a dispute based on minor technical violations, especially when the affected workers weren't supporting the complaints. More damaging to Torrino personally, word spread through industry circles that he'd been kicked off a Clint Eastwood set for aggressive behavior. Within 6 months, Torrino found himself reassigned to handle less prominent productions, working with directors who had genuine labor problems rather than the prestigious films where union representatives could build their reputations. His career trajectory, which had been steadily upward for 2 decades, suddenly flattened as producers and directors began requesting different union representatives for their projects. Unforgiven was completed on schedule and under budget, with no further labor disputes or union interventions. The film went on to win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Clint. More importantly for the crew members involved, it became known as one of the most professionally satisfying productions they'd ever worked on, partly because management and labor had found ways to work together rather than against each other. Years later, when other union representatives approached Clint Eastwood Productions with legitimate concerns, they did so respectfully and collaboratively, understanding that confrontational tactics and intimidation threats would result in immediate removal from a set. The story of Frank Torrino's brief visit to Alberta became a cautionary tale about the difference between protecting workers' rights and using union authority to settle personal power struggles. Torrino himself learned that some people in Hollywood couldn't be intimidated, no matter how much institutional power stood behind the person making threats. He also learned that Clint Eastwood's quiet authority came not from ego or celebrity status, but from decades of treating cast and crew with respect and professionalism. When that approach was met with hostility and intimidation, the response was swift and final. The phrase, "Don't come back to my set," became part of Hollywood folklore, representing the moment when union overreach met immovable professional standards and lost decisively. But the impact of that encounter extended far beyond one confrontation on a remote Canadian film set. Within the industry, the story became a lesson in the difference between legitimate labor advocacy and aggressive power plays designed more to intimidate than to protect workers. Other union representatives learned to approach Clint Eastwood Productions with genuine concerns presented respectfully, understanding that confrontational tactics would result in immediate dismissal. The collaborative atmosphere that Clint fostered on his sets became a model for how labor and management could work together productively when mutual respect replaced intimidation as the foundation for negotiations. For Torrino, the encounter marked the beginning of a career decline that would see him eventually reassigned to handle minor productions where his aggressive style was considered less damaging to important industry relationships. He never worked on another major Hollywood production, and his name became associated within union circles with the kind of overreach that damaged labor's credibility with reasonable management figures. The crew members who completed Unforgiven under Clint's direction often spoke about it as one of the most professionally satisfying experiences of their careers, partly because they'd seen how quickly and decisively their director had dealt with someone who threatened the collaborative spirit that made the work enjoyable. They learned that true leadership sometimes requires drawing lines that cannot be crossed, regardless of the institutional authority standing behind the person trying to cross them. Years later, when labor disputes did arise on Clint Eastwood Productions, they were resolved through direct communication between the director and his crew, with union representatives serving as facilitators rather than enforcers. The respect that Clint showed his workers was returned in kind, creating an environment where legitimate concerns could be addressed without threats or ultimatums. The lesson of Frank Torrino's brief visit to Alberta became clear to anyone willing to learn it. Authority based on intimidation will always lose to authority based on mutual respect and professional competence. In an industry built on relationships and reputation, Torrino had chosen to build his on fear rather than trust, and when he encountered someone who couldn't be intimidated, his entire approach collapsed. The 5 words, "Don't come back to my set," represented more than just the end of one confrontation. They represented Clint Eastwood's unwillingness to allow anyone, regardless of their institutional backing, to disrupt the professional atmosphere he'd spent decades building on his film sets. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment with your thoughts on the video. I always enjoy reading your feedback.